Welcome, I'm Jared Bernstein, and I'm here talking to my friend and colleague from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, Richard Kogan. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to Richard today is because he has a deep and nuanced understanding of the way something like a sequestration is likely to play out. And there's been a lot of discussion that, the sky's going to fall on March 1st when this thing starts, and I don't think that's right. But I still think it's very problematic, as readers of my blog know. So I've asked Richard to take us through, best you can, the way you think sequestration is going to play out, given your understanding of how the government accounts work in this sort of thing.
I'm glad to do that, Jared. The bottom line takeaway is that how it works in the real world is very much a case-by-case issue. And so I'm going to give a few examples to illustrate the range of possible things that can happen.
And just to be clear, when you say case by case, do you mean a government agency by agency, government account within agencies? What do you mean by that?
I mean government accounts.
Okay.
Let's think of the word program as a synonym for account.
Good.
That's close enough for our purposes.
Yep. Programs.
The answer is that each program is different. So the starting point is to recognize that the way the government funds its programs is to provide an amount of money that's available to be used over the entire 12-month period of the fiscal year.
Okay.
Fiscal year started last October 1st. It ends this coming September 30th.
Okay.
What's going to happen on March 1st is that a program manager who thought that he had $100 million,
who's sitting in an agency.
Right.
Okay, yep.
$100 million to use during the course of that 12-month period.
Right.
Is going to find out, nope, you've got $95 million to use during the course of that 12-month period. Mm-hmm. What that means depends entirely on the nature of the program. Here are some examples. One of the programs is the Emergency Unemployment Compensation Program that sends federally funded unemployment benefits to people who are long-term unemployed.
Right, of which we have numerous millions.
Yes, okay. In that program, there is no flexibility in how the program operates. Unemployed people who are eligible for these checks get them. The manager can't say, oh, I think I'll give you less now and I think I'll give you more later, something like that. They get them. So they've been getting them from October 1st on through March 1st. They've been using up their full allotment of money,
right.
And now all of a sudden they have 5% less for the year, which means that they're going to have something like 9% less for the remaining 7 months of the year, but because it's going to take states on average 6 weeks to get this cut going, they really are going to have to make cuts of 11%.
I see.
In the benefits for these unemployed individuals.
So and the reason it goes, the percentage increases because you're jamming it into a smaller time period. Exactly. But the end result is that in this case, where there's none of the flexibility that you describe, the end result is a smaller unemployment benefit check.
And it's 11% smaller.
11.
Even though it's only a 5% cut in the full year's amount of
funding. So that's a good
funding.
Example of where there's no wiggle room. Give us the other examples.
There are a number of other types of examples. If you've got an operating agency that is mostly federal employees, mine inspectors or meat inspectors,
okay.
Or people who
FAA with that the aviation folks.
Yeah, that's
a little different.
Little less flexibility
okay.
there. The people who design contracts for purchasing aircraft for the Air Force or something like that. We're talking about federal personnel.
Yep.
The administrators of those sorts of programs know that the sequestration is coming, and some of them at least have very likely been saving money ever since last October 1st. They've been engaged in hiring freezes, for example. Normally they'd fill vacancies. They're deliberately not filling vacancies. So in that case, if they're already running at a level that's 5% below what they would have been running at, then they just continue to run at a level that's 5% less because their prediction of a 5% cut proved true.
They built congressional dysfunction into their staffing.
That's correct. Now, it's bad to not fill vacancies.
Right.
But on the other hand, it means that the period after March 1st isn't any worse than the period before March 1st, and it also means that the effect of the sequestration has already been felt since last October, and maybe one of the reasons that the economy didn't do too well over the last 2 quarters. Okay, let me give you a third example.
Okay.
National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation, one of the key things they do is evaluate applicants who want research grants. Usually these are university professors and so on and so forth. And during the course of the year, the staff evaluate them and make a list of the best projects down to the not quite so good projects. And depending on how much money they have, they go down the list from the top down.
I see.
Okay. The NIH is going to end up with 5% less money, and that means it can give 5% fewer research grants than it would otherwise give. Well, it's going to make the awards in May or June for the academic year that starts in September, and it's going to make 5% less of them. That isn't really any different from the schedule. There's no compression. There's no squeezing. All there is are 5% fewer research grants. If you thought that NIH and NSF are overfunded and that all this research into cancer may be somewhat wasteful and so on and so forth, then you might not mind. If you think research into cancer, prevention, and other dread diseases is a really important thing to do, then the problem is 5% less money. It is not a problem of compression.
I understand. So, final question. A lot of what we've been talking about, reading about, kind of getting worried about, is how these budget cuts affect us in our daily lives. So take somebody who travels a lot. I'm not using myself as the only example, because there are a lot of people who do that. At what point, based on this kind of accounting flow analysis, at what point do we expect to see problems with lines at the airport and air traffic control towers shutting down and delays, something like that? Very tangible, you know?
Right. And here there are 2 things. The first is that I do not know how much preemptive savings has gone on in those accounts to begin with. I don't follow them. I don't know if the Transportation Security Agency and the FAA have each been holding back already, in which case things are not going to get much worse than they already are. Or whether they haven't been, because that would disrupt their functions. If they haven't been, then they're still in a position where the manager of a program has to make a choice. On the one hand, if he says to himself, God, furloughing people right now, March 2nd, or the week after March 2nd, why should I do this if Congress is eventually going to get its act together in the next 3 or 4 weeks and cancel this whole sequestration, substitute something more rational? That would be stupid. Let me wait at least a few more weeks before I start furloughing people.
Okay.
And he might do that. And if he does that, of course, this is the catch-22, people don't see anything bad happening and say, oh, no problem, let's keep the sequester
So let's say
going.
he does that and the sequester does stick.
Yeah. Well, then he's going to have to furlough more people for a greater percentage of the time in April through September than he would have had to do it if he had done it in March through September.
At which point we begin. To see the kinds of problems that we've been worried about.
And as I said, this type of thinking about how best to run your agency in the short run conflicts with how best to run it in the long run if you can't predict what Congress is going to do next. Right. And of course, no one can predict what Congress is going to do next.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I mean, I think the one thing I take from listening to you is that this whole dysfunctionality just creates a lot of problems, uncertainty, and disruption in what would be much better for the underlying economy is if it were smoother. But that said, there are a lot of mitigating factors such that the sky doesn't necessarily fall on March 1. If the thing sticks, the sky does begin to look pretty gloomy as time goes on.
That's right. A different sort of analogy is you don't want to deliberately invite termites into your house, even though inviting them in doesn't mean your house falls down that day.
Let's leave it there. Thanks very much, Richard.